Now, for a couple of days, we've been talking about Keynesian economics. Some of what we've talked about like this is sort of mechanics. Keynesian economics is the way we've interpreted a situation and the policy that we recommend. Okay? So there's the mechanics of how the system works and there's policy. Okay, and we kind of blended them together a little bit. Okay, Keynesian economics is not the only game in town. Okay, remember Keynesian economics started in the 1930s. Beginning in the 1950s, there was a new game in town, a new school of thought in economics called monetarism. So for about 20 years, from the 50s to the 70s, the monetarists and the Keynesians duked it out. The monetarists believed that there were a number of flaws in the Keynesians' ideas. Okay? The monetarists basically believed four things. I'll tell you what they are, and then we can talk about them. Number one, money matters most. Number two, by contrast, fiscal policy is not very effective. Okay, so the monetarists are going to argue for monetary policy. Number three, the private sector is inherently stable. And number four, in any case, government fine-tuning, that's the term, fine-tuning of the economy won't help and will likely hurt things. Point number one, okay? The monetarists, early Keynesians seem to focus on fiscal policy as the answer to economic problems, okay? Keynes didn't. Keynes was probably the preeminent monetary economist of the classical school of economics. He wasn't a monetarist, but he studied monetary economics, okay? Now, what the monetarists said was, monetary policy is the primary determinant of changes in economic activity. It goes back to what we said earlier. Credit is essential to economic activity, to business activity. Okay? More credit stimulates, less credit contracts. That's kind of the argument here. What they said was, most short-run changes in real output, most short-run changes in employment are caused by changes in the money supply. And they argued most inflation is caused by changes in the money supply. In other words, the money supply is the only game that really matters. Okay? It's only a little bit of an overstatement to say this. An increase in the money supply, short run, causes increased output and increased employment. Long run, though, an increase in the money supply simply causes higher prices or inflation. Monetary policy has real effects in the short term, meaning effects on real output and employment, but those are only temporary. In the long term, all of that stimulus turns into inflation. That's number one, money matters most. Okay? Number two, this is really important. Fiscal policy is ineffective, was their argument. Okay? And the reason why is because of something that the Keynesians didn't understand that we're going to call the crowding out effect. Here's EP. Here's our 45-degree line. Here's our initial level of GDP. Think about how the Keynesians explained an expansionary fiscal policy. They said, suppose the government increases its spending or cuts taxes. Okay. How do we show the effects of an increase in G on this graph? The EP line shifts up by the amount of additional government spending. We know that that stimulates the economy by a multiple amount of the increase in government spending, and GDP rises, right? So more G, more EP, more Y, that's success. That's the Keynesian argument, right? This is review. Now the monetarist said, there's nothing wrong with this, but it's not the whole story, because it ignores this thing called the crowding out effect. Watch. So as the economy starts to grow and people have more income, then they want to hold more money. Okay, so if this corresponds to Y1, this corresponds to Y2. Okay, increase in money demand. Does everybody see that? Dave?
You say that again?
Yeah. Now, we're not in equilibrium anymore in the money market. What has to happen? Demand is greater than supply. What has to happen? No. The interest rate rises. I mean, supply could go up, but the Fed's just sitting there watching things. Okay? So, excess demand causes interest rates to rise. Now, if you think about it, that makes perfect sense. The economy is growing more robustly. People are holding more money. People are borrowing more money. That's putting upward pressure on interest rates. Interest rates have got to rise. Do interest rates affect spending? Yeah, they do. What do higher interest rates do to investment? They decrease it, and they also decrease consumer spending. People stop buying cars. How do we show? Okay, so this, higher money demand, higher interest rates, lower investment and consumer spending. How do we show a reduction in investment and consumer spending? On the graph. EP shifts down. Okay, so this is the increase in G. This is the decrease in I and C. Okay. What's going on here? Well, at a higher interest rate, businesses aren't willing to do that the same amount of investment as they're doing. Okay. There's a fixed pot of savings out there. When government takes a bigger bite, there's less money for the private sector. Okay? So an increase in government spending causes, according to the monetarists, a complete offset in terms of private sector spending, investment, and consumer spending. So when the dust settles, where are we? What's our GDP level? Back where we started. So what's the effect of fiscal policy? 0. Fiscal policy is ineffective. That's what the monetarists argue.